Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It is now April 2nd, 2020, Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. And it is almost, geez, you can barely see, almost 10:30. And just kind of finishing up for the day. Kind of. I still have some more to do after this. But it's on my laptop, so I can just work from my couch, which is going to be nice. Today is the origin story. So I'm going to talk about essentially how I got to where I am today as an entrepreneur, retail business owner, reptile shop owner, and what I did or what happened to get here. So I guess let's just get going. It's probably gonna take a while. There's a lot of weird little facts and random tidbits of information. So I'm guessing it'll be, I don't know, we'll see, 20 minutes. But yeah, so let's begin. First off, parents are both from Mexico. They were both born in Mexico. My mom came over when she was a girl, little girl. My dad was a teenager. They met here in, I think, really actually, here in Walls County at least. And yeah, then I came in 1988. But the reason I bring that up is typically immigrants are usually very, very hard workers. And that's kind of how it was for my parents and my grandparents. They were all pretty much hustlers, hard workers. My mom worked multiple jobs. My dad had very much an entrepreneurial spirit. He wasn't very successful. He just tried a lot of different things, a lot of different sales jobs. Very charismatic, just not the best decisions. But that being said, grew up super poor, like food stamps poor. Going to the Wells County Food Bank was a regular weekly thing that we did, and so because of that, we couldn't afford many things. So from a young age, my mom would tell me if there's something you want to buy, you have to work for it, you have to earn it, because we can't afford it. So the first, I think, thing that I can remember selling that kind of came natural was third grade, and some of you may remember this because I know a lot of you all that I went to school with throughout from K through 12. So third grade, bead geckos. I don't know if you remember bead geckos. It was beads on a string that you would make into patterns. So mostly, again, geckos. You put them on a keychain and you'd sell them. And so I started making these geckos, and I sold them for I think $3 each, maybe it was $2. I don't really remember, but I remember making money off of it and getting excited about it. And so I actually ended up drafting up like an Excel sheet where I did geckos and hippos and lions and stuff, and you could choose your animal that you wanted me to make and the color. And it went anywhere from like $2 or $3 for a gecko all the way up to like 15 for I think it was like a 3D lion that I made or that I was making. But just like school sales, I went door to door throughout our neighborhood or our trailer park, and then my grandparents to their neighborhood, and I sold them for myself and just kind of reinvested in like bead kits and more beads and colors and glow in the dark stuff. And that was like my first thing, and that was like third grade. On top of this, my grandparents had like the most epic yard sales in like northern Greeley. It was massive. People would always show up every weekend. My grandpa was always fixing broken appliances or broken anything, chairs. He was building picnic tables and selling them and just making money every single weekend to help out with expenses in the family and stuff. So that's kind of like what I grew up with. Fast forward to, when was this? Man, it was probably not much later, 5th grade, 6th grade. PlayStation 2 was going to come out, and I really wanted it. I played video games all the time. Huge introvert. Told my mom I wanted it. Same thing. She's like, if you want it, you have to earn it by yourself. So we looked into paper routes and started delivering papers every Wednesday and making money. I think the first check was like $120 for the whole month. But to me, that was like, I was like, big time. That's a lot for a 5th grader. So I saved for a few months. I bought a PlayStation 2 and a controller. I ended up getting more paper route jobs. So I think it was like 3 delivery routes that we had every Wednesday night. My mom had one, I had one, and we split one. So she would drive, I'd toss papers, and it would take probably 3 or 4 hours every single Wednesday. But it was, again, extra income, and for a kid, that's a lot of money. So throughout this, I was always big into animals. Like I had hermit crabs and goldfish and bettas and stuff. And so, with one of those, I think my mom bought it actually. I bought a leopard gecko, and then I bought another leopard gecko, and those two leopard geckos bred and had an egg, hatched out the egg, sold the baby, and then again realized I could sell reptiles by breeding them and selling them as pets. So at this point, I was friends with this guy, Chris Yellowboy. Many of you probably know him, and he got into it too. So we ended up breeding animals and geckos and stuff. And we started our first business, which was called Jiminy Crickets. And so we would order in crickets by the thousands to feed our own, and then we would sell them to anybody who bought geckos from us. And so in middle school, we were selling crickets and animals. And we had these punch cards, but they were like laminated, and so people could pay up front for a gross, and then we'd take orders at the end of school, take it in the next morning, and it was pretty crazy. It was fun. So yeah, still doing the paper route, still doing this. Not even 16 yet, middle school, and fast forward to now high school, like sophomore year, still loosely doing the Jiminy Cricket thing, and turned 15, and that's when I was able to work. So I got a job at one of the local pet stores, and that was like, I think it was 14 or 15 hours a week that I was working. So again, making more money and investing in more reptile stuff. Now at the same time, we at the same time, I don't know if you remember this, in high school I walked around my backpack all the time because I would carry all of my books and supplies in my backpack, and my locker I converted into a concession area. So I would keep 24 cases of like Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, Coke in the back of my car in the winter, and then I'd take them into my locker, so I'd have cold locker throughout the entire morning. I'd buy zebra cakes and I'd flip those, Pop-Tarts, I'd flip those, beef jerky sticks, lollipops, man, all kinds of stuff. So paper out, working retail, and then I was making probably about $200 a month on snacks and profit. So after costs, and this was kind of cool too, because like during high school I was almost never in class, and people were always pulling me out of class to get snacks, and even teachers sometimes would either pull me out or would ask me to go grab them, some Pop-Tarts and a soda. And that ended up becoming so popular that through some of the groups that I was a part of, they started incorporating it into like fundraising for the groups. So like, what was it? I can't remember the group. It was in our English room though. But so we had like a snack pantry, and then an art guild. He started selling snacks too and making money, and so it turned into this huge thing. So around the same time, because of art guild and art class, we had this art field trip where my mom was a chaperone, and my brother and I think it was like 20 of us, went to Europe. It was a London, Paris, Rome, like kind of art trip that we took, and that was like one of the big hooks as far as traveling. Now before this, because my parents are from Mexico, we'd go back and forth, randomly. But that was like my first international trip, and that's when I realized that I loved experiencing cultures and new things, and just different ways of life. So I got to plug that in there. This will all tie together. But yeah, so that was high school. Senior year, I started doing website design from one of my classes, and again, having like an entrepreneur type of mentality, I realized I could build websites for businesses. So at this point, I started building websites for small businesses in Greeley, Colorado, where I'm at right now. And that was kind of like, I learned how to invoice, and I started doing like monthly things. So they would pay me per month, and then I'd solve whatever internet problems they had, and I'd go design. And this was with my buddy Josh Timgen, so he was kind of involved in that too. Fast forward to graduation, go to CSU, because I figured if I'm building websites, I should probably get into like computer science. That was definitely not for me. I was only there for a semester, went to UNC. At this time, I'm still working at the pet store. I'm doing maintenance on like fish tanks that you see in the hospital or like a dentist's office. I was maintaining those while going to school, and still we took another trip to Europe. Still trying to travel regularly. What happened from there? Yeah, I was working all the time. So at this point, Jiminy Crickets is done. I left CSU. I dropped all my website design stuff because I hated it. Working for people and having them tell you what they think is going to work versus what you know is going to work is very frustrating. So just dropped that all together. CSU, UNC. UNC, I joined a fraternity, which is that's a pretty great story, great time. Probably one of the highlights so far in life. So it's a Latino-based fraternity, Nu Alpha Kappa. Shout out to them. They're still doing big things. But so at that time, school and working mostly, I guess. When I was traveling, I had a little handheld camera and started getting a itch for photography and started getting a lot of people complimenting my. Sorry if I talk fast. Also, I just don't want this to be half an hour. I know you're probably thinking that, but UNC fraternity photography, and at this point, I think YouTube is a few years fresh, and blogging was starting to become more of a thing, and I saw a lot of opportunity in blogging. So I created the brand wherespablo.com, and it was going to be just stories from all the traveling that I did, people that I met, things that I encountered. So that was the idea. And so while I'm going to school, I'm doing this. I'm writing, taking pictures. And a year later, I still remember this so vividly. I got an email from a company, and they said, "Hey, we like your post, and we have a related, like a related business or something." I think it was a hotel actually, and they asked if you link to our like hotel search engine site, we'll pay you $30. And I was like, that's easy. Like literally, I just go on the back end and attach a link, and that was it, $30. So I did it, got paid $30, and then I realized that, shoot, with this blogging thing, there is potential, there's a way to make money from it. And at this time, I've now invested in a Canon camera, so I was starting to get more and more into photography. So this is right before I turned 21, and for my 21st birthday, I decided to do something pretty off the wall. Instead of the typical Vegas get drunk thing, I bought a ticket to Cancun for a week, and that was it. No hotel, no plans, no resorts. I had no idea. Literally, I landed in Cancun, and I figured it out from there. And so what happened was, being in a situation where you have no idea where to go or what to do, it forces you to make decisions. And that was pretty crucial as far as the developing timeline. So landed, started conversing with the taxi driver. He took me to a random hostel. This is when I first got into this. Oh yeah, Hostel had come out. So like slasher kind of movie, kids go to a hostel, get killed. This was really popular at this time. So I was a little freaked because that was a thing, but turned out to be pretty great. It was super inexpensive. It was a club hostel, which was kind of obnoxious, but it was inexpensive, cheap. And I stayed there, and I traveled in the area for a week for my 21st birthday, and then came back. And came back with more images and more stories and more writing and blogging and stuff. And I think it was 3 or 4 months later, I got my next paid gig, which was a 3-part link series with the company, and I think they're out of Europe. And so essentially, as long as I blogged and I could incorporate a link to them, they would pay me. It was $137 per link. And at this point, I'm addicted to blogging. I'm looking into SEO optimization, search engine optimization, how to grow a following. I started a Facebook. My first Facebook page ever was promoting that. Was talking to all my friends, subscribers, getting subscribers, newsletter subscribers, all kinds of stuff. And as soon as I got that one gig, I started getting more gigs and more gigs and more gigs, and mostly sponsored posts. So people would pay me to write something, or pay me to attach something to in a post that I already wrote. So now, let's see, what's going on for work there? I don't remember what I was doing for work at that point, to be honest. But I knew that I wanted to pursue blogging. So remember something. I know I was working in order to save to go on another trip. So I think this was the next year. I planned a trip to kind of the similar idea. I planned part two of the Mexico trip where I would buy a ticket and figure it out. So I bought a ticket into Panama City, and then my buddy Carlos met me in Nicaragua like 3 weeks later. So this is going to be 35 days, 30 days. I think it was like 32 days or something like that. So a full month of traveling. So very little. I wasn't really making much money. I just saved, and pretty much all my savings went into this trip just to see if I could do it and what would happen. And again, you get thrown into a situation where you don't know what to do and you're forced to make decisions, and oftentimes turns into something kind of magical. So landed in Panama City and went from Panama City to Costa Rica to meeting Carlos in Nicaragua over a month. And what was cool about that trip is altogether I spent $1,400, $1,400, including airfare. I wrote a post on this too if you're interested. And that was like hugely eye-opening, because you would think that a month-long trip would be, like $7,000, $8,000, maybe $10,000. And the fact that it was $1,400 really puts it into perspective how traveling long term is is less expensive than traveling for like a week or a few days. If you spread it out and you make the right decisions, you save a lot of money. So I was staying at hostels, and hostels, by the way, I'm a huge fan of. The most expensive hostel that I took on that trip was $14. It was in Nicaragua, and I don't know if it's still there, but it was on a mountainside, and there was an infinity pool, and it was epic. It was in the jungle. You overlooked the bay, and it was just such an amazing experience. The cheapest hostel and one of the better hostels, was $5 a day, and included 2 mixed drinks. So that was also Nicaragua. And yeah, because of that, $5 for a place to stay. Food is inexpensive. Like Costa Rica, which was deemed to be more expensive, more touristy, I think it was only, you could probably get away spending $30 a day, and that includes a place to stay and 3 meals a day. Nothing fancy, chicken, rice, and like a juice. But yeah, so when you factor that in, it doesn't cost that much. So like bare bones, you could probably do that same trip without, like, if you're not spending on drinks or attractions and stuff, you could probably do that in like $1,000. But so that was eye-opening. So I come back to the States, and I start really hitting the travel blogging thing harder. I went to TBEX, Travel Blogger Exchange. That's still a thing in case you're interested. And that was my first press trip. So they hooked it up with a press trip in Canada. So essentially, this tourism board in Canada, north of Toronto, put me up for a weekend, and some other bloggers. And in exchange, we would write blog posts and give them some photos. And this is when I realized I could start making money doing press trip or fam trips, FAM, fam trips. And so again, more things are going. Still working, same thing. Working to travel is essentially what I began doing. I'd work my ass off. I'd travel for a month, work my ass off, travel for a month, to the point where I was traveling 2 to 3 months out of the year. So I'm building my brand, I guess, and it got to the point where I was close to about $1,000 a month off of sponsored posts and links, and also doing SEO writing, search engine optimization, which is where anytime you see a post and it's like five best restaurants in Denver, like someone gets paid for that, and it's probably, depending on what website you see, it's anywhere from $15 to like some will pay like $300 for that exact same article, but because it's a more established website, they have more money to work with. So $1,000 a month off my own content, as well as writing these SEO articles for random websites around the world. And during this time, I was selling everything I owned, and got it to the point where everything I had would fit in my backpack. So it was essentially 5 changes of clothing, my camera gear, my laptop, and that was it. Oh, and my longboard. And at this point, I made the decision to um, hitchhike and go to Mexico and try to pursue travel blogging and travel photography as a full-time thing. So that was pretty intense. I again sold everything. My mom dropped me off in Denver. From Denver, I met this guy who took me all the way to Albuquerque. Albuquerque, I got a gig managing a party hostel in Mexico, so I had to hop on a bus to Mexico City, a bus in Mexico City to Veracruz, and same thing this entire time, um, blogging, photography. So that was the goal, to make money from it, so I could travel indefinitely, essentially. And the one thing that I didn't realize was in Mexico, fast forward, party hostel, I end up going further south and working at a spider monkey sanctuary, which is amazing. But what I didn't factor is the high humidity. So I couldn't use my camera as much, and my computer started bugging out. So that over the span of a month, completely, my computer just stopped working. So that's forced me to buy a plane ticket back to Colorado because I could no longer make money if I didn't have a laptop and a functioning camera, which sucked. But arrived back in Greeley, I go to the pet store that I used to work at, and I realize that, or I come to find out that some of the large rodent breeders in Colorado went under, and so there's a huge demand for rats and mice. When I was at the pet store, me and my buddy Paul Kunick were breeding rats and mice for them in surplus. We had enough to sell through the store and then sell to a wholesaler. And so we found this out, and same thing, entrepreneurial mindset, which is what Paul, my now business partner, has too. We realized we should start breeding again and just try to make some side money. And so this is happening. I took another trip to Costa Rica at one point while this was going on, and that might have been actually right before. So I think it was Mexico, Costa Rica trip. The reason I bring this up is because that Costa Rica trip, I had same thing. I did not have a flight back. Doing the whole travel photography thing, I get landed like a press trip down there, and so I was trying to stay as long as I could. And in Costa Rica, I ended up going to this brewery who needed an assistant brewer, and that was my first job working with beer. So I worked with beer for about a month, ran into some it's kind of a crazy story, ran into an issue with some local drug dealers and prostitution. Not me personally, people in the hotel slash brewery. Man, that's a lot going on there. Uh, so brewed during the day, worked the hotel in the afternoons, the front desk, the reception desk, and yeah, prostitution, local drug gangs. Had my life threatened. Nothing serious, but enough to freak me out. And so I bought a plane ticket back the next day, and I was like, "Fuck that! I'm not gonna stick around and try to save, or not save, but try to be like the mediator between whatever's going on." So booked it back. Started the breeding thing. That kind of happened. Um, and so now Paul and I are breeding rodents out of my laundry room, and still working. He's working, I'm working, and now we're starting to sell to the local pet store. So we're starting to bring in that revenue. We started off with, I think it was like 20 mice and 40 rats. Like that was the very beginning thing, or the beginning numbers. And in my laundry room, we built that up to 140 mice and how many rats? 140 breeder mice, and then rats were 105 breeder rats. So that was our operation in my laundry room. And then that got too big, so we moved to the garage, and from the garage it went up to 140, 280, 560 breeder mice, and then the rats scaled up to, I think it was like 300 rats. And so Paul and I are still working. I'm now working at a brewery because I had that experience, so that led me into the brew industry, which meant I could work fewer hours but make more money with tips, to save up and invest. And same thing, just hustling, just working. And it got to the point where we were now supplying other stores in Colorado to another store. And we had people reaching out to us directly, wanting to buy from us and asking us for what, trying to see what else we can provide aside from rats and mice. And it got to the point where we made the decision to, instead of strictly sell wholesale to stores, that we needed to open up a retail location. So, man, yeah, Paul and I rented out this building, this space, built it up, built more racks, uh, expanded how many rats and mice we had to sell to stores to try to get more clients that way. So before we started the store, we already had uh, income coming in, and not like into our pockets, but enough to invest in expansion. And this went on for a little bit. We finally got approved. We got merchandise in. Our first order for our store, I think, was like $500 in wholesale products to sell retail. So if you went in like the first few months, I'm sorry, it was barren. Um, I think the first day we made like $21. Maybe it was $12. I don't know, but it was slow. And in hindsight, I would say start branding before you open a business in case you have any desire to do something like that. But it was super slow. And yeah, it was patience. It was waiting. We were both still working other jobs, so we would alternate. I would work during the day. He would close, and then I'd work at the brewery at night, so that way we could cover shifts. Um, I left the brewery shortly after opening. I think it was maybe like a month, just because I needed to be at the shop more. But because the shop wasn't paying us, I started doing Uber and Lyft, and realized, and that was kind of a switch too. So Uber and Lyft was essentially free advertising because I could start up a conversation with random people in town, and I'd be able to bring people in, or they would be able to tell their friends about us being a reptile store. And I was getting paid too, so that was kind of a win-win. It was advertising, plus I was putting money in my pocket to pay my bills. Not making much, but growing the store nonetheless. And man, it was slow. It was slow to start. It got to the point wholesale was keeping us afloat because we're selling to other stores and private snake breeders. So that was keeping the business going. But this, you're gonna find this hilarious. Uh, we were doing the math at the time, and Paul and I were convinced that if we could do $75 a day in sales, that we would make it. We would be like bringing in all the money, uh, and that's crazy. I mean, looking back, that was like, I don't even know how or why. And I mean, I know how. Wholesale was enough to where $75 a day would pay off retail expenses and overhead expenses. So that meant we could pocket wholesale money, which was not true because all that money went into more products and shelving. And uh, consumer minds are interesting in that if a store is barren, they're less likely to buy. But if they go into a store that's completely loaded and packed with product, they're more likely to buy. I don't know what it is. I haven't really gone into the psychology of it, but that's always fascinating. Anyway, patience, patience, patience. Within a year, we expanded. We took over the unit next to us to start breeding more because the demand kept going. Patience, patience, working. Uber, Lyft, Paul's still working. We're not taking any money from the business. And then we started doing shows and Facebook advertising, newsletters, events, anything to spread the name. And within a year, we had to expand again. So we took over another unit. So now we have 3 units that we're renting out, one for retail, one for wholesale breeding. And at this point, I don't know how many rats and mice we had. It was a lot. We were selling a lot. Patience, patience, still working, still working. I stopped the Uber Lyft thing. I picked up a job at City Star Brewing. Same thing, making money. Left Crabtree, Uber Lyft, City Star, but that was only, I think, Friday, Saturday nights, the occasional Monday. So it was very very minimal. Paul was still working. We still weren't taking any money. And again, patience, building, building, building. And what was it? Finally, Paul quit his job. So this was probably 4 years into us buying those first mice and rats. This is now 4 years later. and Paul finally was able to quit his job to rely solely on the business paying him. I was still working part-time at the brewery, and again, high tips allows me to pay bills but not bring money in myself, or more money in myself for myself from the shop. And same thing, patience building, branding, social media marketing. And 5.5 years later, finally, the business was able to bring in enough money to pay both of us, to pay all expenses, and invest in getting more product and getting more and more stuff. And that kind of brings us pretty close to where we are today, because that was January. 5.5 years. 5.5 years, 3 years, 3 years and 3 months after our retail business opened, we were finally both at a point where it could pay both of us. So if you're thinking about any type of entrepreneurial thing, business, it takes a long time. If I would have known when we first bought those rats and mice that I wouldn't be making or bringing money in for 5.5 years, I honestly don't know if I would have done it. But I mean, now it's worth it, I guess. So, but yeah, here we are. It was 6 years last month since we took over. No. Yeah, it was six. It's now 6 years, I guess, almost 6 years since we started the retail business. We took over the retail lease in March 4 years ago, but we opened up in September. So September 10th, we turned 3 of last year. 3 years old, the retail did. And at this point, we sell about, I don't know, maybe 1,000 rodents a week between stores and our own location. And we're making moves to go online and possibly, depending on what happens with COVID-19, open up more locations. So that's kind of the long-winded origin story. If you stuck around for that, super appreciate it. I know that was a lot and I talked really fast, and I'm sure there's a lot I glossed over. But finishing out, if you have any questions about any of that or want me to go more in depth, let me know. I could either send you a link or I'll make another video talking about that one story, whether it's hitchhiking or the Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua trip one, because that has a lot of stories. The Europe trip, the photography. Oh yeah, I was doing, I mean, I told you about the photography thing, but like I was doing like weddings and schools, like high school photos and stuff like that to make money at the time too, throughout all of this. So I still do photography freelance, mostly travel based, and it's not that often. I don't do weddings anymore or parties. I don't do that anymore, but that's still some additional income that I bring in from time to time. So if you want to know about that, let me know. But I think that's it. It's now April 2nd, 2020. Fully self-employed from the shop. I help out at the brewery once or twice a month if they need me. There's more to talk about, but we'll save that for another day. Yeah. Subscribe if you want to know more, if you want to follow along. These videos will hopefully get better with time. Tomorrow is going to be April 3rd. It's a Friday tomorrow, and I should have a 3 to 5 minute recap about what goes on a typical Friday, because that's kind of a different day for us at the shop. So hope you all are well. Be healthy. Talk to you soon.